Welcome, everyone. Very happy to be with you today for this session. I'm always honored when Mark asks for my time for this presentation. I've been saying no for the last few years because we've been very, very busy with Velixo, but this year I felt like doing it, and also I felt like taking some challenge, trying something new, and not just spitting out stuff that I already know. So the topic of my session today is continuous integration and continuous delivery with Acumatica. So I call that deploying your Acumatica customizations, I could say Acumatica applications too, with confidence. If you're not familiar with the concept of CI/CD, you will be by the end of this presentation. Before I start, just want to introduce myself. Acumatica has been growing a lot, so I've been doing these presentations for 4 years, but it's been a while, so maybe some people in the room have never seen my presentations. I'm with a company called Velixo that I started in 2017. Before that, I was with Acumatica in the product management team. So I work with Mark, the dev team. Also helped set up the Montreal office for Acumatica. So this is where my funny accent comes from. I'm French speaking. And Velixo is an Excel-based reporting tool for Acumatica. So this has been my focus. It's an Acumatica-only solution. I built this from scratch. Initially, it was basically me and nobody else building and supporting, but now we have a full team. They are with me at the summit, and I'm very happy to have Pavel, who is now our CTO. Very talented Acumatica developer, by the way, so if you have Acumatica questions, you can also ask him. He is amazing. Beside that, I'm also very involved in the Acumatica community. We just started a new webcast with Tim Rodman, another Acumatica MVP called Excel Talk. So Tim asked me to plug the show here for you. We basically ask people to call the number on screen, 833 Excel Talk. You leave a message, and then once a month, we get together. It's live, unrehearsed. We take questions from the audience, we play your message, and we answer your questions. So obviously, I think that your skill set is way above that of the type of questions, and no offense to people that leave messages. So it's accountants and CFOs and Excel users. You're really my crowd. I love working with developers. I love development, and I had a lot of fun working on this session. So once again, today we will be discussing CI/CD, continuous integration and continuous development, and even continuous delivery with Acumatica. Actually, I had another slide, but I removed it by accident. It was a survey slide, so just a show of hands. This is when we did the review, Mark. So I'd like to start with a quick survey. So if you're using any kind of source control system for your Acumatica customizations today, can you please raise your hands? Okay, pretty good. So if you're not, by the way, I would invite you to leave this session now, and please start using one. I think that I have accomplished my mission today, so you should be using one. It is a prerequisite for doing a CI/CD, and you will be understanding why. I realize that it's not totally obvious how to do source control management with Acumatica. There's been other sessions in the past on that topic. I believe at the end of my slides, I have a reference to a session that gives you some tips and tricks. But you'll be seeing that it's a key part of what we'll be accomplishing today. Next question, the Acumatica test framework. I assume that you've heard of it, but who is using it today in their Acumatica projects? UI test. Wow, okay. If you've heard of the Acumatica, is that Always Current, Mark? Oh, yeah, I think it's called the Acumatica Always Current program. So ISVs that have Acumatica solutions, it's now a requirement to provide tests that Acumatica can run internally before they release a new version. So they basically use the automated test that you write to confirm that the solution will work with new Acumatica versions. And you do that by using the same testing tools that Acumatica uses, which is the Acumatica test framework.
So Gabriel, did anyone raise their hand?
I think, no, I saw like somebody here like just say, yeah, maybe.
There's at least one person, two people that I know that are MVPs that are using it. I guess they're not here, so now I can give them crap for not showing up.
Yeah, I mean, the concept is great, and actually, and we'll get back to that, but Acumatica provides you with the same tools that they use internally to test their own applications. So that's a wonderful way to automate the testing of your Acumatica applications. So it could be customizations or full-blown modules. And again, this is another integral part of CI/CD with Acumatica. Next question, who does unit testing? Good. Robert, is that Robert? Yes. I wasn't sure with your N95. So are you using the unit testing framework of Acumatica?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so that allows you to spin up DevOps graphs and whatnot without actually wiring input an instantiation of Acumatica.
It's very powerful, and for me that was a first. So I said that as one of the challenges, like personal challenges for this session. I wanted to learn the Acumatica unit testing framework. This is not something that we use at Velixo, simply because we don't customize Acumatica that much. We have very, very lightweight extensions. Most of what we do is through OData. But I still wanted to explore that because I think it's something very important. It has huge advantages over the Acumatica UI testing framework, and this is also something that we will be covering. Final question, and I assume that I won't see a single end for that one. So is anyone using a CI/CD tool for build automation today? Oh, I have one. What's your name? For other projects, okay. Yeah. And honestly, it was a challenge. I wanted to have an end-to-end solution to show you. It is difficult, but it is possible, and I hope that what I did here will be useful to others that want to try doing CI/CD with Acumatica. We are doing CI/CD at Velixo, but for our product. And again, the Acumatica customization is very, very small and does not require that. But definitely, if I was starting a new Acumatica project today, this would be the first thing that I do.
So Gabriel, are you going into the test SDK? Are you going to talk about it at all?
Just a bit, yes.
Because since nobody raised their hand hardly, you may want to just explain why they should be using it and what it is real quick.
Basically, Acumatica provides you with the same testing tools that they use internally to test the Acumatica ERP. And it's a very simple way to automate testing of your applications. I will have a full demo. Actually, I prefer to wait until I get there. Perfect. Okay. Yeah. So before we get into what I really like, which is coding, I just want to explain continuous integration and how that relates to like traditional software development practices. So in traditional software development, which is what I've been used to for a big part of my career, like integration is something that is often an afterthought. It happens at the end of the project when everyone has completed their work. So if you're not using source control for Acumatica today, you're definitely doing your integration towards the end of the project. This is usually a very painful time because two developers may have modified the same bits and pieces of code. So now you're trying to merge that, and what do I do? Then you have code that no longer compiles. You have code that may have worked before and suddenly breaks with the changes that you just made. Code that works on your machine, like who has ever said that? Oh, it works on my machine, right? We've all said that. So it works on your machine, but it doesn't work. What? Yeah, good. Yeah, I should have brought that T-shirt. It's a good one. Yeah, so code that works on your machine but not in the production environment, missing dependencies and so on. So, I mean, you have expectation and reality on my slide. So this is pretty much how the experience is if you're just waiting until the very last minute to test your code, to integrate everything, and to actually test in a staging environment, okay? So enter continuous integration. So CI means that whenever one developer, so let's call him Steve. I will use like Steve and Annie in this story. So whenever like Steve writes code on his laptop and another developer, Annie in this case, codes on her desktop in the office, they can both work separately and integrate their changes at the same time using a central source repository. So I'm sure you've heard of Git. You might have used Subversion, or like if you're like older, CVS and that type of stuff. So basically, it's a central database containing all your source code. So in continuous integration, everybody pushes code to the central repository, and then everybody can build and test the code independently, okay? In this model, you have a tool called the CI server, the continuous integration server, that will automate that for you. It will build the code, it will run the test, it will ensure that everything is working as expected, and even better, if the code passes, it will then move to another stage where the code gets tested on your testing environment before ultimately reaching production, okay? So to be considered as practicing CI, continuous integration, you must be checking in or pushing your code to a central repository often, okay? I would say multiple times per day, ideally, but at least once a day. If you're not pushing and merging and resolving whatever conflict you have and submitting your code regularly, you are not doing CI. The benefit of CI is that this integration process that we discussed earlier becomes a non-event, okay? Software is written and integrated all the time. You do it multiple times a day. Before CI, the integration happened at the end of your development process. And now it happens all the time, and it is just the way you work. So continuous integration is CI. There's another portion called CD, continuous delivery. So this is the ability to not only integrate and test your code, but also to deliver it constantly. So this means that anytime Steve or Annie makes changes to the code, they automatically test their code at the same time. So the CI server will do the automated testing using the Acumatica test SDK or whatever test platform you use. And then it will process and continue and test in environments that are similar to a production environment. Usually you will have multiple stages. For example, at Vilixo, and Pavel, correct me if I'm wrong, we have a development environment, we have a staging environment, and then the production environment, okay? So in each of the environments, we have a set of tests, and as we progress and get confidence that the code is good, all the automated tests pass, we promote it to the next stage. Okay, so this way we can get feedback early. We know if the code compiles. I mean, honestly, this is the most basic thing you could do. If you're just pushing code to a central repository and set up a CI server, just ensuring that the code compiles is already a big win, honestly. At least you know that the code still builds. That's a starting point, and this is something that takes maybe an hour to set up using Azure pipelines. Good, okay, so I think we're getting to the exciting portion of my presentation, at least the one that I enjoy the most, coding. So let me tell you about the tool set or the different tools that I used for this presentation. And by the way, I'm making everything available to you, including some of the custom command line applications that I had to work on for that. It's on GitHub. You will see the link a few times. And I'm sure that Mark can share the presentation with you at the end. So first of all, I mentioned source control. I said this is the most important thing. It is a requirement if you want to do CI/CD. I use GitHub. GitHub is an online Git repository. You can now, as far as I know, create private repositories without paying. So Microsoft acquired GitHub a few years back, and now you no longer need to pay. So cost is not even an excuse for not using GitHub. You can, by the way, host Git internally. You can have your own Git server. You don't need to use GitHub, but it's just very convenient. And this also happens to be what we use at Vilixo for all our code. I also set up a test Acumatica 2021 R2 instance. So if you want to do automated testing, you will need to test on something other than your production environment. Okay? Otherwise, if everything fails, you'll not crash all your 200 users that will soon be running with hammers to your desk. So you need at least one Acumatica test instance. If you want to do CI/CD with multiple stages, okay, let's say staging, development, staging, production, you will need multiple instances. They could all be running off the same machine, by the way, so you don't need to have multiple VMs. Azure pipelines. This is the CI server that I used. Okay, this is just one of them. GitHub has its own CI thing now. Pavel, do you remember? GitHub Actions. So this is the same thing. I was more familiar with pipeline, so this is what I used. By the way, there's also a free tier for Azure Pipelines. So you can use it for one project with a lot of build time, and you will not need to pay for it. Basically, Azure Pipelines will be compiling and building your code anytime you commit. You will see that later on when we make changes. So that's, again, another tool that's available for you if you just want to have commits and then automatic compiles and not worry about testing. You can do that very easily, and that will not cost you a single penny. Next, and this one actually ended up not being necessary, but I will still mention it because it might be necessary in your case. I set up what is called a build agent locally on my own virtual machine. This is because I was expecting that would be needed to run the Acumatica user interface test from Azure. Azure provides you with standard build agents that are like vanilla Windows Server 20-something with a standard set of tools, but I needed to be able to install things on it. So I set up my own build agent. So that's running on a Windows virtual machine. It could be running on your own server if you wanted to. Okay, so I said that I will not go through the process. It's well documented online. But again, as far as I know, it's not a strict requirement if you want to do Acumatica testing as part of a CI/CD workflow. MS Test, this is the test framework that I use. This is one of the many testing frameworks available in the .NET world. There's NUnit, XUnit. Robert, I think if you recall in your the video, the one you did on the testing framework, you used XUnit. This is the one that Acumatica mentions in their training. I think they're all have their pros and cons. This is not my goal today to explain which one you should use. I think they're all equivalent, and they all work as well within Azure pipelines. The Acumatica test framework, I mentioned that, and I will be saying more in a few minutes. The Acumatica unit test libraries, and the most important part, duct tape. That was really important in getting this to the finish line. And I'm glad this was useful in the end. I was not sure I would be able to come. We caught COVID on a trip, and I'm not in the US. So anyway, with all the traveling restrictions, I was afraid that this would all go to waste. So I'm very happy that there's a crowd here and that this will benefit, I hope, at least one person. Okay, so let's continue and take a look at the GitHub repository structure. Can I? No, I will not use that. Okay, so this is a screenshot of the GitHub repository structure. You have the URL, so you could actually open right away if you wanted on your machine, github.com/vlixosolutions/Acumatica CI demo. The first folder, Acumatica extension lib. This is a standard Acumatica extension library. I created a very simple project with 2 graph extensions. That's it. So that's my first folder. It is in the GitHub repository. Whenever I make a change or add something to my customization, I will be modifying this and then pushing it. The customization folder. This is the actual Acumatica customization project. So when you create customizations in Acumatica, you might notice that there is this customization menu. Actually, I think it's the next slide, yeah. The customization menu, in the customization project, you have that source control option right at the top, okay? So this is what I use to create the customization folder that you see here. So this contains all the artifacts that are not part of your Visual Studio solution. So your page customization. So if you added a control to the invoice screen, that will be in an XML file. If you added database fields, it will be one more XML file. So when you use the Acumatica source control integration, it spits out a folder that I also keep in my GitHub repository. And this is important, and you will understand why, again, as we progress towards a working solution. Customization package tools, the third folder, like this is the duct tape I was talking about. I will be explaining more. This is just a simple set of command line tools that I had to build to make this a reality. Libs, dependencies. There's a few things that are not included in Visual Studio that are not on my build machine. The Acumatica libraries mainly, so you cannot find that on NuGet. So I needed to package that here. And then my 2 testing projects. I struggled with .NET Core versus .NET Framework dependencies, and ultimately I just decided to keep both separate. My UI, my user interface test project, is a .NET Framework project because the UI test project is a .NET Core project, and the unit test project is a .NET Framework project. So the unit test framework has a lot of dependencies on Acumatica, which runs on the .NET Framework, and I had to use .NET Framework. You might be able to get it working differently, but I honestly doubt that it would work with .NET Core. Azure Pipelines, YAML file. So this is your build definition. We will take a look at this file later. So this is what describes what will be happening whenever you push some code to your GitHub repository. So these are all the actions: compile, test, deploy, and send flowers to your mom. Like you put that in this file. I have two PowerShell files, so build customization and publish customizations. PowerShell, it's basically a batch file, a fancy batch file. It just so happens that it's easier to run PowerShell scripts than it is to run batch files from Azure Pipelines. But it's a one-line file that you have in there. The NuGet config, that's how I'm telling Visual Studio where to pull the dependencies for the test framework. So the Acumatica test framework ships with, not ships, but the Acumatica test framework requires a few NuGet packages. They're not published on any public repository. Do we have any Acumatica developers here? Okay, anyway, I mean like internal Acumatica employees. Stefan, you're not, I know. But anyway, I can tell you what I would love to see. I would love to see these libraries published on the public NuGet server. I struggled a lot getting these dependencies loaded. You have to rename the file. By the way, Robert, thanks a lot for your video. I'm acknowledging your stuff at the end. I have a link. I learned a lot from this video, but it's a convoluted process, unfortunately. And it would be easier if everything was published like any other NuGet dependency. So if anyone from Acumatica is listening, I think that would be a simple and worthwhile enhancement, and it would also help increase usage of the Acumatica test framework. Yeah, and that's it. There's a README file, so with some instructions in there. The source control integration, let's spend some time. This is not entirely obvious. So when you see Acumatica source control integration, you might think, wow, Acumatica is integrated with Git or with Subversion. It's not, okay? It says source control integration, but all it does is write your customization project to a local folder on your Acumatica server, not on your local machine. If Acumatica is running on your local machine, yes, it will be. But if you're like testing from a remote server, it will be saving the files on there. So it takes all the artifacts, as I was explaining, like all the things that you see on the left, screens, data access, code files, GIs, and spits out one XML file for each. This is something that you need to store in your Acumatica Git repository, so your source control source repository. By the way, another very important reason to use source control is revision tracking, knowing who changed what and why. And there's a very useful function, it's my favorite function in Git, called blame. Yeah, you knew where I was going. So sometimes you'll find a bug in production like months after, and you know something changed, and it was not like that when you first shipped this code. So use the git blame function. It will tell you for each line of code who changed it, when, and then you have a link that will give you a comment. And this comment ideally should link to a ticket in your bug tracking system. So this way you know why it changed and who you can blame for that bug. There was a presentation made at the 2019 Virtual Developer Conference on source control with Acumatica. Mark, I'm sure there's a recording somewhere. I only found the PDF on Google. The link is there too, but it explains how to use that. Okay, it's not intuitive at first, and one of the things, again, if I may share some feedback, I would love if Acumatica would remember the parent folder, because I always save to my very specific folder, the customization one, and Acumatica insists on renaming it at all times. So just a little annoyance, but yeah, that's the first thing that you need to master. And again, you can just be doing that, leave this session, and you will already have benefited from your time at the Acumatica Summit. Once you have all these artifacts in Git, you will need something to build the customization package. You know that zip file that you import and publish in Acumatica? Well, you need a way to get from all these like little XML files and then back into the zip file, okay? And by the way, maybe it's important to mention, but there's a good reason why you're not storing the zip file in Acumatica. That's because the zip file is a binary. You cannot view it in Notepad, you cannot track history, you cannot know what changed. So you need to store the individual artifacts with history. But at the end of your build process, like the final thing that gets generated is your customization package. That's a zip file. If you're building, somebody mentioned using CI/CD in a different project, it might be a Windows application, it might be a website, okay? In the case of my customization project, I need to use a tool to build this zip file. Acumatica ships a command line app called px.commandline.exe. If you read the documentation, they'll tell you that this is how you build a customization project from source control. I tried very hard to use it. I had tried actually a year ago at Velixo and was never successful, and I was not successful again for multiple reasons. First of all, this tool requires a full local Acumatica instance to work. That's fine on my local machine. That's a problem on my Azure build server. Acumatica is not running there. Second problem is that it's crazy slow. It spins up a real Acumatica instance, starts, initializes, you know, like that 5 minutes you waste anytime you recompile your code. Well, that needs to happen too. And finally, for some reason, it seems that it does not work when running from a limited user account. Your build agent, the service that will continuously be building and testing your code, runs under a different user account, and it seems like PX command line does not work really well. Is there an alternative? The answer is yes. I build one for you, and I will be sharing all of that. But before I explain how to use it, let's just take a look at a customization project and see what's inside. So I will open my Summit website, and we will export the project that I built as part of this session. I'll go to customization projects. So let's export that project. So as you know, it's a zip file, but let's open the zip file. I want to take a look and show you what's inside. It's not rocket science, and you'll understand how I came up with this alternative solution. So it's in downloads. Here, so I have my zip file. And the zip file contains an XML file. And let's open this file. I will use Notepad here. Oh shoot, I need to extract it first. Okay. So as you can see, this is an XML file. It was pretty clear from the extension. It contains a root node, customization, and then one node per element in my customization project. If I go back to Acumatica and open that, you'll see that I have two things in this project. I have one screen that's been customized. And I have a file here. So that's it. The XML file is just a collection of all the different elements that were exported when you save through source control. So if you think about it, it's very easy to take all the XML files that you got from your customization project and then stitch them together into one XML file and zip everything with all the artifacts. So this is exactly what I did for this project. I decided to forget about PX command line, and I built this customization package tools app. It's a simple .NET Core command line application that basically recreates the customization package from the source files. So it's there, it's free to use. I just put an MIT license, so you can use it with no issues. And then if you want to build your customization project from a command line or any script, you just call the exe, build, and then your path description, and it will output the zip file. So one more piece of the puzzle for continuous integration and continuous delivery with Acumatica. The second thing is publishing. So remember, we want to be testing our project in a real-life environment. So it can be a staging server, a development server. So at some point in my build process, I need to publish the customization. Acumatica does provide an API for that. It's part of the ServiceGate API, so /API/ServiceGate.asmx. It's a SOAP-only API at this point, so I would expect that Acumatica will soon be replacing that with a REST API, but today, that's how you can publish a customization through the command line. Azure pipelines cannot call the SOAP API, so I extended the same command line app that I was just talking about, and I added the publish verb. So you can publish any package, URL, username, password, and then you just wait and it publishes a customization package. Testing. So now is the time to discuss the Acumatica testing framework. Acumatica has like 2 different tools. I would say the most popular one, although like not many people raise their hand, the most popular one is the Acumatica user interface framework, the UI test framework. It is built on top of Selenium. So Selenium might be familiar to people here. Selenium WebDriver. So Acumatica created a very fancy layer on top of it with wrappers that are automatically generated for all the standard Acumatica screens. I hope it's big enough, but you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, there's this UI test that tests a simple button, the send fax button that I added. So you can see it opens the screen, goes to the first record, it calls my send fax action, and then it verifies the value of a field. This is a dummy customization, okay? I added a send fax button. I did not really make it work. Actually, it's worth taking a look at this customization just so you understand what it does. I'll go to customers here. It's back, okay. Yeah. So let's open the screen. My customization adds this send fax button. Okay, so let's go to another customer here. So there's nothing in the fax field, so when I click the button, it just changes the fax number to who still uses a fax. And this is exactly what the UI test does. It clicks that send fax button and verifies that the fax field of the default contact panel equals this message. As you can see, it's very, very clear what the test does, and that's a nice thing about the Acumatica UI test framework. Instead of having to work with CSS selectors, divs, and UI elements that are like very, very complex. I'm not a web dev myself, so I don't get all these selectors. You work with something that closely matches the screen layout. Okay, so again, this is a customer screen, and then I have my default contact that is here, and the field is called fax, and this is exactly what you see on the screen. So when you're on the UI test, it will actually open the web browser and go through all these steps. Let's do it. Actually, you'll see how the test works. So I'll go here, select my UI test project. This is the test explorer. This is built into Visual Studio. I have customer maintenance, test, send fax button. Right-click run. So you'll see that it opens a web browser. In my case, I'm using Chrome. It will open the screen, click the button, and we will see a green check mark when it's done. So let's wait. Good, okay, it's running. So opens Acumatica, logs in. Once it's logged in, it will open the customer maintenance. Go to the first customer, click send fax, and then it closes. So you can see there's a green check mark. It means that my test has passed. So if 3 months from now, Mark opens Visual Studio because he needs to make a change, his boss asks for something, and he breaks that customization, the test will fail. And the CI/CD server that continuously runs the test will send a warning that, hey, something broke, okay? So the UI test framework is one of the ways you can test your Acumatica customizations. You can even test the built-in Acumatica code if you want. If you have a business scenario that is very critical, You can also build your own test. So again, it's very, very nice and very simple. Create the customer screen, click open, first send fax, and that's it. By the way, and I will go very quickly over that. If you look at the documentation, Acumatica has its own runner to run the test. Question?
Right, okay, you just said it. So all of this testing that's running, is that running back on your local build machine?
Now it just ran on my local machine because I wanted you, but in a few minutes we'll be pushing changes and it will be running on the Azure server. I wanted people to visualize what's going on, okay?
You're running it actually within the pipeline now.
Yeah, exactly, correct, yes. So just one very important thing, like if you look at the documentation and training provided by Acumatica, there's a special command line application to run these tests. And this does not work well with Azure pipelines. I wanted to use MS Test and the standard testing organization of Visual Studio and .NET. There's a class called UI Test Base. If you want to do the same thing, I'm short on time, I don't want to go through all of that, but basically I found a way to use just the wrappers with standard MS Test. You need to call a few private methods through reflection, so some reverse engineering, but I think for CI/CD this is much simpler than using the command line application that Acumatica provides because it integrates with Azure. The other testing tool that you can use or technique is unit testing. And this runs without a browser. It basically executes the code and verifies for state. This is more recent in the Acumatica space, but it may be something that you're using actively in your existing projects. There's not a lot of documentation. I was not able to get this to work myself. I had to rely on the help of Dmitry Nomov to get things working. But anyway, he helped me get to this test. So if you run the unit test for sendfax, you will not see anything. It just tests the behavior by invoking the business logic and verifying the internal state of that code. There's one major advantage. It's much faster because it just runs code. It's not clicking everywhere just like a user. So you could run hundreds, if not thousands of tests in a much shorter time frame. At Velixo, we mainly use unit tests to test our application. And how many tests do we have, Pavel?
Several thousand.
Yeah, and in about 20 minutes, we go through the entire test suite. If it was just UI test, it would be taking a day every time, basically. And you can see it. It took 16 seconds the first time, and the other one was much longer. Although it says 7 seconds, I remember waiting far longer initially. Okay, so I wanted to illustrate both testing techniques. This should be a very critical part of your CI/CD strategy. You need a way to confirm that the test works before you promote it to the next stage.
Yeah, just to give you perspective, guys, the unit tests themselves, several thousand unit tests, and they take about 10 seconds to execute all in all, and the rest of that are the UI tests, 15 minutes or so. So that's kind of the time difference.
Yeah, it's much faster and more scalable, but usually you need to design your application for unit testing, and Acumatica is tightly coupled in many areas, and it makes it harder to do unit testing. Although it's possible, and I'm sure there's people in the room that have far more experience than I do on unit testing. There are tools. There's a training T280, I believe, that talks about unit testing, and it's available with Acumatica. Putting it all together, like the pipeline file, the Azure YAML file. This is a file that contains all the instructions for your build, okay? Let's take a look. I will open my YAML file. It is stored in my repository. It's not in the solution itself, but we can find it here. And let's zoom in. There are visual tools inside Azure Pipelines to build that, but let me go through the important sections quickly. First one, trigger. So what will trigger a build? In this case, I want to trigger a build only if I'm pushing code to the main branch or if there's a pull request that is targeting that main branch. If you're a developer working on a new customization, nothing is ready. You're just working locally. You don't want the build server to just use all the cycles just for your code. You only want to test when you're actually ready to test. So That's how it's set up. It will only test if there's something targeting the main branch. Steps. So there are standard steps. It installs the NuGet tools, does a restore, it builds a solution, it builds my customization project. Remember that, scroll down. Remember that PowerShell script that I was talking about? So it calls that. So there's a task called PowerShell, one line, command line app. It publishes a customization project on my website, and then it runs the unit test. So I'm just telling it to run that unit test project DLL file, and then my UI test project. And once everything is done, it copies the customization project to the build artifact. So this is basically the output, the result of my pipeline. So this is the finished product, if you want. And that's it. So let's do a real life test of that. I will make a change in my project, and we will intentionally break something. So I have a customization here, SO order number validation, that basically requires you to enter a customer order number when the order is more than the amount that you see in this constant here. We can try it in Acumatica. Let's try to create a sales order. We'll add a new one. Pick my customer. And then as soon as I add something that is more than $1,000, you will see a warning on the customer order field. Here we go. So the field now shows a warning. Customer order number is required for orders of more than $5,000. Actually, it says 5,000 because I tried that earlier before the session, but the code is still at 1,000. I rolled back the changes in Git, but not on the server. Sorry about that. But let's enter another amount here. So you can see that we have this warning, and I have a unit test and a UI test that will verify that this is indeed the case when the code reaches production. So I'll say that now it's not $1,000, it's $3,554. Okay, and let's say Mark changed that by accident. Okay, he just had you said like fat fingers. So he was making another change, and actually let's make that fat fingers for real. So Mark made this change by accident, and then he went to Git and decided change the code that Dimitri wanted me to change. And Mark is a good developer, so we'll create his own branch and not push into the main branch. So we'll call it some change. And now Mark will commit and push this change. Perfect. So if you recall, I mentioned that in my YAML file, the Azure pipeline file, that I would only be running the pipeline if the code targets the main branch. It's an own branch. You can see it, some change. So I will create a pull request. So in GitHub, and I think this is pretty much like standard Git terminology, you create a pull request. So it's basically a request to merge some code that sits here into another branch or another repository. In my case, that's the main branch. So I will create a pull request. I could assign it to a reviewer. Usually you will have somebody reading this stuff. And as soon as I create the PR, the pull request, my pipeline will start running. So let's go to Azure Pipelines. I'll refresh the page. And give it a minute or so. Oh, one new run. So you can see that the blue wheel is spinning. It says change a code that Dimitri wanted me to change. And then let's open the job and we can see the progress in real time. So it's going to go through all my steps. It will check out the code from Git. It will install the NuGet tools, restore the dependencies. Then it will build a solution. So Visual Studio Build, the same thing you would do. So at this stage, if Mark broke the code completely, we will know straight away because it doesn't compile. So imagine if you're a large team, like you work at Microsoft, so you would know that. Like imagine 1,000 developers on Office, and at 9 p.m. on a Friday, somebody breaks the build because he committed something without checking that it builds. So this would flag and immediately identify what went wrong. So it builds successfully. Now it's going to publish a customization on my Acumatica test environment. You can see that my command line app, the one that I'm giving away for free that you can use for your own projects, it logs stuff in the console. So it might not be super visible. Let me zoom in. Yeah. So it's logging in. That will take a minute or two. We're still on time, hopefully.
But that could be running anywhere.
Yes, yes. I set up my own build agent for this one, thinking that I would need to have a local Acumatica instance. But it could be running, and Microsoft gives you, I think it's 1,600 minutes a month of free pipelines. So it's basically CPU time to build your project and run your own tests. Okay? So in my case, I'm publishing to summit.velixo.com. That's my website. And while it's doing that, let's go to Visual Studio. You'll see the script there. Open file. I have publish customization. So that's my PowerShell program. Publish, package name, and yeah, that's it. Okay, so let's go back.
But that Acumatica instance could have been running anywhere.
Exactly, yes. It doesn't need to be running on the build machine or your own machine. So it's done. So it says logging out. Very important. If you want to be a good citizen, always log out after you do your API stuff. Otherwise, you will be running out of API licenses. Yeah, he's laughing. I'm sure you. Yeah, it's very easy to forget. Yeah. So I'm surprised that logout takes that much time. Yes. Yes, exactly. I never like sit there and wait, except when we need to ship an urgent build for a client. That happens. So, but by the way, sometimes like you will like be looking at this. It's helpful too, because I want to have confidence as a business owner that whatever fix we're shipping will not break everything. So that's my green light. I will not send even like an urgent hotfix to a customer without running this and ensuring that it works successfully. So logout is taking a long time. Oh, finally. So now it's going to run the unit tests. That should take less than a minute. You know what? Let's take the last test run in the interest of time, because the last test run also failed. I committed with $5,000. So what would happen is that you mentioned the text message. That's a good thing, okay? In my case, it's not a text message. I do get an email message here, except that I deleted everything. Build failed. Let's find Acumatica CI. Okay, yeah, so I do get an email when it passes like that. So it tells you that it ran for 3 minutes. The status, if you had any warnings, so code warnings, and the test, okay, so that's all there. If it fails to, it will send you an email. Yeah, my test failed already, so it's done. It took 4 minutes, 36 seconds. I can go to Azure Pipelines and look at the test tab and see what are the different tests that failed. So it says order of more than 1,000 requires order number. And I can see that my assertion failed. So right away the test failed. It's not going to go any further. If the test was successful, I would have what is called a build artifact. And let's go to a successful build here. I'll go to the job itself. No, I'm sorry. The artifact is... Yeah, it might be because of the screen resolution. Usually the artifact shows up on the top right, and it's not instant. Oh, right here, sorry, published. So in my case, I have the customization. So that's ready to ship to clients. It's a fully tested and working customization project. It's already published to my test server. But now I can take this, upload it to my website, and share it to all my clients. Okay. You can take this to the next level and do something called continuous deployment. I'd say this is very optimistic or aggressive, but you could actually take it to the next level, and after all the tests pass and everything, you could actually deploy your customization to a production environment. So maybe during a maintenance window at night. One thing that is really nice about Azure Pipelines is that you can set up a separate pipeline called the release pipeline. And I have a screenshot here. The release pipeline can have multiple stages, and these stages can have different conditions. One of the conditions can be just to wait. So before it went to the staging environment, it needs to wait for a week or 24 hours before it goes to the next stage. So that gives some time to humans to do a final round of testing. Another condition that you could add, and this is what's visible on the right-hand side of the slide, is to query work items. So do we have any open bug reports for this particular build? If not, and a week has passed, you can proceed to the next stage. So with that, you could have constantly updating Acumatica code that is tested. So all your existing logic is always working, and all the new logic that you deploy also gets tested. I hope that you enjoyed my session. I have time for questions. I know that there's a session after this one, but I will be happy to answer your questions. There's a bunch of links. You can take a picture, but I think it will be easier to just download the slide deck. I'd like to thank Robert for his amazing YouTube presentation on the Acumatica Test SDK. So this deserves an entire 1-hour session, honestly. I was very, very brief discussing that, but please watch his video. Everything is on GitHub. And you can drop me an email here. Here. Yeah, my email address, gabriel@videxo.com. And if you enjoyed this presentation and want to relax tomorrow, turn your brain off and just watch some magic, please join my other breakout session called Making Magic with Excel. So even if you don't care about Excel, I have a professional magician that was featured on TLC and a few I'm sorry, I don't have his bio in front of me, but anyway, amazing guy, and he will have 4 magic tricks that are linked to my product and that we'll be presenting in this breakout session. So tomorrow at 2:15 or 2:55, 2:15 in the Flurry room. So would love to see you there as well.
Great job. So you should show up tomorrow at 11:20, I think it is. I sent you a meeting request.
Yeah, I saw that coming during the session.
For Ask Mike Anything, and then you can say, this is what I would love to see this. So Mike will actually be here, and you can actually ask him those things.
You mean like the feedback I have?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
it's minor things. I don't want to bother Mike with
Yeah.
these little things.
So hold on, before you ask a question.
Sure.
Where's the presentation packet?
I don't know yet. If you send me an email, you have my email.
You know what? I can also add the PowerPoint to the GitHub repository.
Yep. Okay. Any questions?
Question?
Yep. I got it.
How would this process that you just showed us change if you had multiple customization packages and maybe customization packages that depended on each other?
That's a very interesting question. Do they really depend on each other, or this is because today you have set them up this way? Is it like our dependency, or it's more technical than anything?
I would say that it's a hard dependency, even down to the sequence that they're published.
Published? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So you would obviously need to have a single pipeline, and in the pipeline you would be publishing the different projects. Git as a concept of, and hopefully I'm not saying anything wrong here, but sub-modules. So you could have separate GitHub repository or Git repositories, and then in each of them you link to all the dependencies. So when you're testing, you're still pulling the latest code, but testing them all together. I think this is something that should be avoided as much as possible because it gets increasingly difficult. I'm thinking of one guy here, I will not name him, that has a very complex Acumatica environment with dozens of customizations with a lot of intricate dependencies. As much as possible, if you can keep them and test them separately, that's best. Maybe another idea, if you do have them separately with their own tests, you can have another testing layer that is separate that does a full end-to-end testing of all the customizations together. So you can still test them in isolation, and then you bring them together in a separate package. But that's a unique challenge, I would say, and not something that I thought about when building this. But I hope it will be useful for you.
It will be. Thank you.
Thank you.